Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
On Monday, just gone, I gave a talk at Edinburgh University, and about 6 minutes into the talk, the fire alarm went off. Now, it's been rumoured that there was a rather bored-looking member of the audience seen leaving the lecture theatre shortly before the alarm went off. So, be warned, I'm watching the exits this morning. So today we're carrying on our theme, our series on outsiders and strangers. And we've been thinking about people like Rahab, people like the woman at the well in Samaria, who, to all intents and purposes, would have been thought of as outsiders, but who became a crucial part of the story of God's people. And next week we'll bring the story to a close with the story of Ruth, another Gentile lady who came to have a key role in the story of the people of God. But this week, I want to flip things round a little bit. Our theme for the whole series has been outsiders in. But I think today's passage speaks more about insiders out. Because there's a sense in which God calls us all to be outsiders. Outsiders to the world. Outsiders to the norms and behaviours of society around us. Wherever those norms and behaviours are contrary to God's ways. We need to be insiders who move out. Now, we've just read the whole of Romans chapter 12. And as you heard that and as you saw the words on the screen, you'll have seen there's so much content in that chapter. And Mark said to me a while back, it's a great passage, but I hate preaching on lists. Because that's what it seems like, isn't it? Do this, this whole list of things that can characterise Christian living. Practice hospitality, do this, this whole list of things. But today I don't want us to focus on those lists particularly. I want us to focus very much on this one verse that you can see on the screen. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. Don't be insiders, but be transformed, become outsiders to the pattern of this world. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's going to be our text. And we'll think about other bits of the passage, but in the light of that verse, how God calls us to be not conforming to the pattern of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. And I'm going to pick 3 verses out of that whole passage. Thank you, Claire, for reading it so beautifully. And the whole passage is so valuable. But I'm just going to pick out 3 verses today. One that points us to the need for transformation in our relationship with God. One that speaks to us about transformed thinking in our relationship with ourselves. And one that speaks about transformed thinking in terms of our relationship with others. So, we're going to start with verse 1. Good place to start. Assuming that... Am I clicking this in the right place? Maybe, John, if you could just put us on to the next slide. Thank you. So, verse 1. I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Now, we've just celebrated Easter, and even more recently, like 10 minutes ago, we've just celebrated communion. And those point us to the sacrifice that Jesus made in laying down his life for us. And throughout the Old Testament, when we talk about sacrifice, when we read about sacrifice, it ends with something being put to death. A lamb, some doves, oxen. On the cross, Jesus himself being put to death. But here, Paul speaks not about a sacrifice where you're put to death, but he talks about a living sacrifice. He calls on us to live our lives sacrificially for Christ. Now, some people that he wrote this to did end up dying for Christ. They did end up laying down their lives. But what Paul's talking about is that actually before we come to that, we have to live as living sacrifices before in some cases it might come to dying for Christ. So what does that mean? What does it mean to be a living sacrifice? I'm going to start by telling you it's something it doesn't mean. Always a good strategy. So I've got a friend, and my friend really likes trains. And when I say he likes trains, he likes trains. So every Thursday evening, he goes to the local Model Railway Society. Now that he's retired, he spends quite a lot of time with his own model railway layout. But he doesn't just model trains, he likes real trains. And he's quite often at Coventry Station. He's at Coventry Station so often that he's on first name terms with the staff there. And before he retired, he used to travel to London a lot. And he was on first name terms with the drivers of the trains down from Coventry to London. And he often got rides on the footplate because he was on such good terms with them. And he doesn't just go and see trains. He reads railway magazines. He even reads railway timetables. And I remember once being in London with him, and Euston was closed. And he knew the way, didn't have to go and look anything up. He said, right, we need to go over to Marylebone, we need to get this, and we'll be there. And he was right. But the thing is that although he really loves trains, it's not his whole life. He spends a lot of time on train-related activities. That's what he does, not what he is. But in terms of our relationship with God, it's quite different. Our relationship with God isn't what we do, it's what we are. Set on its head. And the Message translation of this verse I find quite helpful. The Message translation puts this verse in this way. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. You see, we're not just God's people when we come to church on a Sunday, or when we come and work in food pantry during the week, or when we visit the sick, or when we do anything that we might say, well, that's being a Christian. We're God's people every moment of every day. When we're doing the ordinary things of life, eating, sleeping, shopping, working, looking after grandchildren, whatever it may be, all these things are part of our Christian lives, part of being God's people. And because they are, we should do them in such a way as to be holy and pleasing to God. Whereas Colossians chapter 3 says, whatever you do it with all your heart as working for the Lord. Because being a Christian is what we are. It's a 24/7, 365 days a year thing. 366 in a leap year. It's every moment of every day. We are God's people. And we never know what impact that has when it's out in the shops or wherever. There's someone else I know. After he'd retired, he'd returned to his old place of work, maybe about 6 months after he'd left. And one of his former colleagues said to him, "We miss your goodness." Now, he wasn't aware he'd been particularly good. He wasn't aware that he'd done particularly good things. And in fact, he was quite disappointed with himself in how little he'd spoken about his faith at work. But others had noticed something about being, he was a person of God. So Paul calls us to live every moment of our lives as an offering to God, in relation to God. So this is the first area that Paul wants us to examine our thinking in, our relationship with God. And our second is about our relationship with ourselves. Let's see if we can move things on. Thank you. So Paul says in verse 3, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. Rather, think of yourself with sober judgment. Now, perhaps particularly if you've a prominent role in church or in society at work, there can be a temptation to arrogance. You know, actually, God must be really pleased that I'm a Christian because I'm doing these wonderful things for him. And even if we don't have any particular prominence, there can be a temptation to sort of look around and compare ourselves with others and create a pecking order, you know, which puts us above certain other people at church. You know, I'm more important than them because I do something more important than them. But all that thinking is divisive. Paul explains that we all have different gifts. We all have different parts to play. We all need each other. There's that one phrase in the reading, we belong. We're members of one body. We belong to each other. We have gifts, and gifts are things given to us. They're not because we're super special people that we get given this. It's because God is a giver. God is generous. And so what we have to contribute is because God has given it to us in the first place. So it's not about our own self-promotion. It's about simply using what God has given to us. Now, the world often tells us that it's important to get on, to achieve, to become somebody special. The good news is that we're already somebody special. We're already special because of what we celebrated at communion, because God sent his Son to die for us. So we don't need to promote ourselves. We can't be any more special than being someone Jesus gave his life for. But there's a flip side to this verse too. Do not think more highly of yourself than you ought, but do not think of yourself less highly than you ought. And for some people, this might be more of a danger than the one on the screen. Because society can too often send out a message that demeans people. A message that says you have no value because you have no job, you have no money, you have no home, you're different, you're an outsider. But there's no place for that thinking amongst the people of God. God gives everyone a value. God gives everyone the same value, the value that Jesus died for you. And remember our series about outsiders in. It's often the people who society would give no value to who end up being crucial in the story of the people of God. Rahab was a prostitute. The woman at the well in Samaria had had 5 husbands and was living with someone who wasn't her husband anymore at the time. People that society would say, you count for nothing, you're pushed to the margins. In God's view, they become central to the story. So we need to renew our minds, transform our thinking, to not think of ourselves too highly, but not to think of ourselves too lowly either, but to see the value that God places in us. So we don't say, I'm special because I can do wonderful things. And we don't say, I'm of no value. We accept, we look at ourselves with sober judgment, but we see the value Christ places in us. And then finally, I want to think about our relationship with others. If we could move on, Johnny, please. And verse 10 says, honour one another above yourselves. Now, some of you might be thinking, hang on a minute, isn't there a tension here? You just said we weren't to think of ourselves, we weren't to put other people above us, we're not to think of ourselves as the worst, but now you're saying honour one another above yourselves. This isn't about thinking that others are better or worse than you. What honouring one another does is about giving them the value, the respect that they deserve because they're made in the image of God. Each one of us, we have our flaws, but each one of us, part of the body of Christ, someone that God values. And so Paul calls on us to honour one another above ourselves. That doesn't require dramatic gestures. It doesn't require, going to the top of the mountain and shouting, so-and-so is wonderful. Often honouring others is done in simple ways like spending time with people, really listening to what others have to say, allowing others the time to tell us their news before we burst in with our own, thanking people when they've done something that blessed us. And we also honour one another by the way we talk to others about other people. See, the world often seems to like to really pick over the details when someone messes up. A fallen celebrity generates many more column inches in the paper, many more social media posts than someone who behaves well. Society likes to tear people down. Society likes to point out people's failures. But this is not the way for the people of God. We're not to celebrate the shortcomings of others, not to take secret or perhaps not so secret pleasure from the exposure of the shortcomings of others. We need our minds transformed so that we love to talk about the positives we see in the lives of others, rather than spending our time focusing on the negatives. And I want to suggest something we might do today over coffee. I want to think about someone in the church who's done something that's blessed you this year. Okay, so we'll give you a bit of time here. Let's think back since the start of the year. Somebody done something that's blessed you. Well, my suggestion is that you take time over coffee to tell two other people about that. So it doesn't have to be huge things, although if it is a huge thing, it's great. But I'll give you two examples. Okay, so I'm getting in first, and I'm telling more than two, I'm telling everybody. So, Monday before last, it was my birthday. And as they do every year, Graham and Evelyn sent me a card through the post. And the writing inside the card said, "Dearest friend." And that really blessed me, that they'd taken the time to get the card, to write in it, to take it to the post. They didn't have to do that, but that was a way of them honouring me. And I'm grateful for that, so thank you. Second example was, Sue and I have been quite worried about our daughter's health. And Claire spent a long time, Claire spent a long time just listening to our concerns and praying for us. And that blessed us. So thank you, Claire. So these are very real, not massive things, well, they were massive to us, but not in the sort of course of events, massive things, but ways we can honour one another above ourselves. Honouring one another is an attitude in many ways more than it's an action. Am I giving this person my time because they can benefit from my wonderful wisdom? Or am I spending time with this person because we're on the same journey together through life and we can support each other as we travel along? So Paul urges us to have a different mindset from that of the world. So we've thought about three aspects of that mindset this morning. Our relationship with God, where we give our whole lives, where it's who we are, not what we do. We thought about our relationship, our mindset about ourselves, to have not too high an opinion or too low an opinion. to not be in competition with each other, but to simply be with each other. And then we thought about our mindset and our thinking about other people, to honour one another, to spend time speaking about how others have blessed us rather than how others have failed us. So how are we to achieve this mindset? How are we to go from insiders to the outside? Well, verse 2, our text verse says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." So it's not something we do to ourselves, it's something that's done to us. Our mind is renewed by the work of the Holy Spirit. God himself transforms us through his Spirit. So does that get us off the hook? Do we just sit there and wait, right, transform me, God, and everything will be all right? Well, again, I think the message has a very helpful translation of verse 2. Fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. We might not be able to effect the transformation ourselves, but we can certainly make our mind more ready for the transformation. We can make it more fertile ground in which the Holy Spirit can work. We fix our attention on God. And as Paul says in Philippians, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. We can't transform our minds, but to some extent we can control what we fix our minds on. If we fix our minds on the things of God, then it gives God space to work and carry out his transformation in us. So fix your mind, fill your mind with the good things of God, and see what he will do. Amen.